Grazie.
Non sappiamo che inizia. No, ce lo vediamo nelle
Sì, lo sappiamo.
Scusa di lei facendo YouTube e poi video.
Sì, è iniziato. Ok, ci siamo. Buongiorno a tutti, good morning everybody. My name is Roberto Ferrari, Executive Director of Museo Galileo, and just few words to welcome you all. I'm very happy to see colleagues from different institutions, which are friends and partners of Museo Galileo, and some international guests online. So welcome to every one of you, and also a welcome for those who are watching at us through our YouTube channel. Just a few words to say that we are particularly happy of this opportunity of this meeting because we all are committed to advancing open access research. We believe that make data available for verification or falsification is an important issue for those who are involved in research and museums and also museums, especially scientific museums, which deal with communication of science and with the general issue of scientific citizen science. Sorry. The open science debate encompasses different things. It's a very broad debate which includes several issues that we are not going to discuss today. For example, the dynamics of the publishing sector and the dynamics of research evaluation systems, which is a very tough problem in many countries. And as a museum which is involved in research activities for the history of science, like Museo Galileo, we are particularly interested in designing a strategy for open science. And I would say that to some extent, museums are open science by definition, in the sense that the results of their activities are open to everyone, are freely accessible, as everybody can see through the website of Museo Galileo, but also other partners. So the point is, to what extent to be more open is really effective, really fruitful for the impact we are expected to have on society. And one issue, maybe we will come to this point later, is what does really openness mean? Because it's just the availability of data, or we have to understand which are the real possibility, the real chances of the users to be real aware of the variety of uses that data allow. So this is an issue. We are continually interested in understanding which is the balance between releasing simple data, which are maybe for scholars easy to understand, but not for the general public, or to offer more complex product of result as a result of research. To define more complex product requires more deep work on the sources, work with scholars, work with those involved in the communication of the history of science. So there are several things we could discuss from a methodological point of view and from a practical point of view. And so this meeting is divided into two parts. One is public, is the first part, with also a keynote speaker. I will leave the room to Joran Beldegrun for managing this morning, and where we can have the opportunity to listen to colleagues of institutions who are also deeply involved in the strategy definition for open science. So they will bring us their experience, and we are very glad for that. In the afternoon, we will work on the different perspectives of our Italian colleagues in order to define maybe a common ground for reasoning about open science, and why not also to propose a specific approach for science museums at the national level at last. So I just have, I would like to say thank you to all the participants. We have 3 guests: Ismael Raffos, Professor Catherine Voland, Dr. Anna Faustino, and to colleagues from Museo Nazionale della Scienza e della Tecnologia Leonardo da Vinci, Museo di Scienze Planetarie e Museo di Storia Naturale del Mediterraneo, Museo della Fondazione Scienza e Tecnica, Sistema Museale dell'Ateneo Fiorentino, il Consorzio GAR, l'Istituto di Scienze dell'Informazione e della Tecnologia del CNR, il Museo di Storia Naturale di Vienna e l'Istituto di Public Engagement and Impact di Berlino. So thank you all. I think we can have a start. And so please, Joran, I would ask to thank you, Joran, Anna Maria, Bernardo from Series Academic, which is the consultancy company who is helping us in defining a strategy and also in the management of this meeting. So Joran, please.
Perfect. Thanks, Roberto. So again, hello, my name is Joran Mellgrün. I'm going to facilitate this part of the conference workshop this morning and avoid that there's any awkward silence in the next 2 hours, and in contrary, have a lively discussion. As explained by Roberto, we'll talk about open science in and by museums. Museums' roles are to share knowledge and their collections to the wider public. So you may think that museums are by default, by their nature, open. But that's true, because on Monday you are usually closed. So 6 days of the week you do an excellent job, you're open. However, on the 7th day, you are not. So if you calculate well, this means you're to 86% open. Depending, of course, on the opening hours, which some of you have, you might have more or less percent of openness. So the aim of this workshop is to hear from each other how to get to 100% openness, to understand how you define 100% openness, to hear from each other different approaches which you use to open up your museum, and also to debate whether it's worth the effort to have your museums completely open. Because opening up also on Monday with the exact same resources, capacity, and processes means that the quality of your museum's activity on the other days will go down. I'm happy that we have today with us also Ismael Raffos, who is an expert on open science. He's UNESCO Chair on Diversity and Inclusion of Global Science at Leiden University at the Center for Science and Technology Studies. He's part of the UNESCO Open Science Monitoring Working Group and also has participated in the European Commission's expert group on indicators for researchers' engagement with open science. He will frame the discussion on open science far better than I did, and explains that open science is not at all about opening hours of your museums. So, Ismael, the floor is to you for the introduction on open science.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation. A pleasure to be here. I feel humbled by the place, thinking the magnificent pieces in the museum and just walking in the city is really humbling to think of science. If you can open the presentation. Let me see. I will begin by introducing my institute. I come from the Center for Science and Technology Studies at the University of Leiden. This is a center that focuses on research of research, particularly in terms of research evaluation. And it has been influential for the good or for the bad in terms of how science is assessed in Europe, because it was one of the pioneering centers for assessing research in terms of indicators. And we know that the use of indicators in research evaluation have caused a lot of debate and possibly a lot of harm, not the least in countries such as Spain or Italy or Poland, which are highly centralized and do a very mechanistic use of research assessment. So about 15 years ago, in a center that was very focused on using indicators, thinking of them as a good tool for assessing, we started sort of a reflection and came up leading a reform movement towards a more holistic assessment of science, given that many activities of science, such as public engagement, science communicated, were not being properly assessed as contributions. And our engagement with open science, therefore, has come when research assessment has been seen as a barrier for the adoption of open science practices. And so this is the angle from which I come. I tried to frame my presentation broader than this, but I know virtually nothing about science museums. I have done little about public engagement, besides thinking of how to value the contributions of science beyond the pure publication. Let me control the time, otherwise I'll always end up talking too much. So this is the angle from which I will start, and these are going to be possibly the reasons why I'll have a number of blind stops. So let me go to the argument that I will make. When we talk about open science, it is a bit as when we talk about science, that it's not clear at all what we are talking about. Are we talking about infrastructure? Are we talking about efficiency? Are we talking about access? Are we talking about issues of all types of citizens having access and benefiting from science? If you look at the discourse of open science, it covers this breadth of issues. And this suggests that open science is a policy buzzword that is used for people with different visions about where science should go to promote their agenda. I'm going to be a bit provocative, as this was the job that I was asked to do. So I think it is worth to put open science in the context of the debates of science as a whole. And that's the second thing that I'll try to do. And then the third thing is I will just plug out a number of areas or playgrounds in which there is contestation about the benefits or the outcomes of open science. Given the context of museums as intermediary organizations, I will follow from the debate that was already initiated about whether more emphasis should be put in the outputs, making things open, or in the processes, or maybe in the packaging of the outputs, which facilitate genuine processes of exchange. And therefore, the debate for me, I think, will go into really, for museums, the need to think not just on the outputs, but in the packaging and what type of interface in work that they would do. Good. So let's start from this notion of that there are many narratives of open science. I will start by the definition provided by the European Commission in 2016, when we'll start with the umbrella term, which is a metaphor that it's often used. It says, open science is an umbrella term that includes open access, citizen science, open peer review, open software. But actually, I realize it's not just an umbrella term, but it's a number of umbrellas with different terms under different umbrellas. Let's see how the European Commission framed open science in the famous report by Open Innovation, Open Science, Open to the World, that the Commissioner Moedas did in 2016, which I think for the European Union was a sort of sea change in the relative importance to open science. I view the European Commission strategy as rather narrow, in the sense of thinking that, you see, talking about cooperative work, but very much in terms of diffusing knowledge with using digital technologies and collaborative tools. And there was citizen science also hanging in the discourse, but it was somewhat secondary in 2016. It was really about the infrastructure and this vision that digital technologies would provoke such a transformation in the way science would be carried out. It was this techno-optimism that we often find in sort of top-down approaches from central agencies. Now, in 2023, when you look at the Open Science webpage of the European Commission, it's a bit more nuanced. There is the notions of quality, efficiency, responsiveness, assumed to be responsiveness of research to society, and the notion that the sharing of knowledge and data between a variety of stakeholders that are invited to participate in the process. So there's been certain widening within the European Commission, but some of the people that have been long engaged in open science, more from a critical perspective, so next one, please, such as people that made this open and collaborative science in development network, have been critical about these mainstream approaches, such as the one by the European Commission of open science, because they think that it does not lead to inclusive practices, it does not lead to the participation or certain types of scientists or certain types of communities, and that stronger principles about knowledge commons, cognitive justice, situated openness. So openness in different contexts, in different countries, might mean very different things. And these people who are working in development, thinking about indigenous people, but also not in indigenous people, let's say, herbal medicines in the Pyrenees, type of knowledge. How is this covered by this notion of open science? And so these people have been critical, and they've been influential, if we go to the next one, in what maybe was the most important development in terms of the redefinition of the open science discourse, which was the Open Science Recommendation in 2021, November, in which it's a rather short document, but I think it brings about, or brings to the forefront, issues about inclusiveness, multilingualism, importance of the benefits of science for society as a dimension to take into account when thinking whether science is actually open or not. So there's been this change of discourse. And I would recommend reading the recommendations of the UNESCO. It's by the way, disclosure is UNESCO chair, as I am since last November. That doesn't mean that I'm supported by the UNESCO. By many means, you know, the UNESCO has a lot of goodwill, but little resources. But I really I genuinely find that this recommendation was a breakthrough in terms of broadening the notion of open science. You know, so we see that there are different perspectives, and there is a chapter in a book by Fescher and Friesecker, which talks about 5 schools of thought, and there are possibly a variety of ways of putting this, but they propose these 5 ways. On the one hand, there is the infrastructure school, which is the more traditional view of open science as you know, putting open access papers, open data, and so on, as something that needs to be done. Also, given the traditional, let's say, the Miltonian ethos of science as a communal shared effort. There's a pragmatic school which focuses more on efficiency, and there the argument, the type of arguments that funding agencies in places like the US love thinking. You know, with technology, we'll put everything in platforms. People will be able to quickly grab information, and this will accelerate innovation. So this notion of efficiency. Then there is the public school, which is access of the public to science as a social good. There is a democratic, and I suppose the public school must have been prominent in the discourse of museums in tradition. Traditionally, there is a democratic school which puts the emphasis on the inequalities of access to knowledge and the benefits of knowledge. Issues such as the different efforts given by public science to diseases of the rich, very specific cancers, or the disease, or you know, these days the news about Alzheimer breakthroughs coming from pharmaceuticals, but resources for malaria, Chagas disease not being there, not being found, right? So there is a democratic gap in the way science is providing benefits to society. And then there's a measurement school, which is about, well, how do we think of the way research is assessed, and how do we measure the benefits of science? And if you take, well, the proposal by these authors is that if you take a discourse on open science, you're going to find an overlap of these schools, but some of the documents will have more of one or more of the other. And just for example, checking the Italian strategy yesterday, at least in the first page, I saw that infrastructure was really at the forefront. Similarly, in the Spanish strategy, which came out a couple of weeks ago, they talk about open science or democratic, but then when you look at the indicators, there's no indicator for open science or for public engagement. It's all in the infrastructure. So this might be helpful heuristics to think where the emphasis is put. Good. So next. So we see that there are a variety of discourses on open science. How does this fit in the broader visions about where science is going? And here I will draw on a publication a few years ago by Johan Schott and Ed Steinmuller at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex, in which they proposed that science, technology, and innovation policy have had three main phases since the post-war. And let's try to locate open science in these framings of innovation policy. The first framework was the linear model. You know, after the nuclear bomb and the extraordinary effects that it had in the legitimacy of science, in terms of procuring benefits for governments, given that the nuclear bomb came out of basic research, or that was the perception, there was a strong discourse that you should leave universities alone. There's going to be science, there's going to be public research organizations which will focus on the technology, and then companies will focus on innovation. And this will flow from innovation. You will have well-being. And these were the policies dominant in the 60s, 70s, until in the 70s, 80s, there was the realization that Japan, which was a country which did not have strong universities, was doing extremely well in innovation. So how come? What was going on in Japan that led to success in innovation without having a strong science system? What was it? Economists found out that it was the interactions of companies with their knowledge partners. So Japanese companies were not relying on state-of-the-art knowledge from universities, but they were capable of recruiting PhD students or master students in an efficient way, and they were very capable of making interactions with a variety of knowledges. So from the providers, from the users, linking this in the value chain with the knowledge that could come up with universities. So the emphasis said, well, you know, what Japan is fantastic at doing was the interactions. There was also part of this discussion also took part in the Nordic countries. So Sweden, Denmark, Norway, maybe Norway less, but Sweden, Denmark, particularly in terms of how they were managing to create these interactions. So from this came the notion of innovation systems. Say, yes, science, technology, and innovation are important, but we should facilitate interactions between the different actors in the system. And here you can think of, well, making knowledge openly accessible or facilitating the flow of knowledge would lead to more innovation. And this would lead to economic growth, and this would lead to well-being. Now, we can see this in terms of, next slide, in terms of the different actors. You have in the top left, sort of the knowledge creation, universities, academic research. The bottom left is industry. So there was a lot of emphasis of innovations coming from industry, and the social demand on the top right, and the financial sector. And here, there was also importance given to the intermediaries. So intellectual property right units, universities, came out in the 80s, 90s as brokers. And in this period, not citizen science, but public understanding of science, unidirectional, came to the forefront. Good. Now, this is the model espoused by organizations such as the OECD, who focus on economic development. But this notion was assuming that innovation will lead to well-being. Now, in the 2000s, 2010s, and even more now, there is a realization that innovation does not always lead to positive outcomes. A lot of innovation is producing problems, asbestos, climate change, the way artificial intelligence is suppressing cultural diversity, even in European societies, urban poverty, or I like this example of, so when I was in the University of Sussex in 2007, 8, when there was the financial crisis. The financial crisis was fueled by financial innovation. Where were the mathematicians and the physicists coming to the city of London, to the financial sector from? They were coming from Oxford and Cambridge. So, you know, these fantastic economic mathematical tools of Oxford and Cambridge, they're the biggest employers of physicists and mathematicians in those years, were the city of London. And this created terrible world mess, right? So innovation is problematic. And from this view that innovation can be problematic, came the next view of science, or the next model, please, which is what it's called the inclusive and transformative innovation. And I believe this has become an important pillar, at least at the European Commission level, saying it's not enough to have innovation, you need to have innovation in good directions. In directions that lead to solving missions, such as climate change, energy, grand challenges, sustainable development goals. Then, so once we have these three models, we can think of how the discourses of open science fit in the broader picture of some of these models. So, for example, I believe that the efficiency school is more in the tradition of the innovation models. So this is a pragmatic school. What we want is to get things out so that there is innovation quicker, faster. Whereas the democratic school, it's more in this model of inclusive and transformative innovation. Some of the public understanding of science has a legitimation role that maybe fits better with the innovation systems, while more critical forms of public engagement fit better with the third model. And my proposal is that these three frames of innovation policy, science, technology, and innovation policy, might be useful in thinking also what intermediary organizations, how intermediary organizations position themselves. Good. What has been different of the UNESCO broader framework of open science fits definitely with this third frame of innovation policy, in which they say that open science is not just about making things open, but it's making things open with certain values and certain principles. So, and this stems from the Declaration of Human Rights in 48, which states that participation and benefiting from scientific progress is a human right. It's very aspirational. So the collective benefit of science, equity and fairness, diversity of inclusiveness of different forms of knowledge are values that are part of this UNESCO recommendation, in which there are principles about collaboration, flexibility, sustainability. And this means that whereas a lot of the European discourse on open science has been on the green pillar of open scientific knowledge, so that the openness of the outputs, open publications, open data, or an open infrastructure, different researchers having access to the infrastructures. So this is on the outputs. In the UNESCO framework, next, a lot of emphasis, at least in the recommendation itself, goes in the processes. Dialogue with other knowledge systems, local communities, professional expertise, marginalized scholars. Question. So for science and technology museums, so how much history of nursing is there in the museums as compared to a history of, you know, the prestigious doctors in hospitals? How much history of primary health care?
Workers,
Workers,
entrepreneurs.
right? Or so in the and this might be considered marginalized scholars, or and then engagement with a variety of societal actors. The question, of course, is how much balance should be there between the four pillars, and this is where you see that the documents still, I believe, very much focus on the top right-hand side, the pillars 1 and 2. So good. So basically, from I believe that the UNESCO recommendation takes the view of this inclusive and transformative innovation framework, which is more pluralistic, and this shifts the emphasis towards the processes of open science rather than the outputs. Now, what are the playgrounds in which there is some contention, and which are so the battlefields in which there is questions about whether open science is living to its promises? So, and I'll flag it just a number of areas for, well, to see if there might be kicking some ideas. Open access of publications, do they really make such a difference in relation to the huge investment and policy attention that is now on that? Open data, yes, it's very important for CERN, it is very important for genomics. How about the long tail? Is it important for lab-based research in many fields? Global inequalities in science, what is happening as resources are made open? And evaluation. So let's go one by one. I'll try to keep to 30 minutes. Diana Higgs, a professor at the Georgia Tech University, is going to present a seminar this Friday in the online seminar of CWTS. And she's got, one of the things she's going to argue, I had the privilege of having access to her presentation in advance, is that the open access of publications has received a lot of attention in relation to the potential benefits. What is the evidence that making publications openly in open access is accelerating science? Most of the actors engaged in a certain field in the frontier are sharing the information, and they have access to the publications. So that the evidence of fast discovery, except for some anecdotal cases, it's not well established. Most of researchers are in institutions with libraries that have access to many of the publications. So I believe I believe that we should put everything in green open access. So I'm not questioning that this is a public good. What I'm questioning is the policy focus and the amounts of money which are being posed into making publications openly accessible, when the benefits might be questioned. And another issue which I'm not sure to which extent it's working is that in developing countries, there is the problem of having access to the libraries, but apparently there are initiatives such as Research for Life, which facilitate access. Oh, actually, when I'm in India, what they tell me is that Science Hub is a portal located in not Kazakhstan, not Uzbekistan, in one of the towns, Tajik, no, the one,
Azerbaijan.
no, it's the one by the Black Sea, not the,
Kyrgyzstan? I don't know.
no, it's the other one. I
Yeah.
think we said them all except. So it's a Russian researcher located in a place that it basically is hacking the library system.
Ah, yeah.
And if you put the DOI of a publication, she gives it to you. So and this is extremely important in Latin America, and in people are using it a lot and supporting it a lot, and in places like India.
Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, it is.
Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
Sorry. Then there is. Is it true that firms need access to publications? Well, big firms like pharmaceuticals pay for the access. It's not such a big deal. And small firms are in innovation spaces where they are in touch with innovators. So it's question, and they are doing types of innovation that either have access or they do not necessarily need such broad libraries. So it's questionable. Governments and not-profit rely more on white papers and great literature. And the same for medical purposes. Dedicated websites and blogs translated to the language of users are doing the brokering work. Not, you know, if I had experience of my sister having a breast cancer and tried to figure out from the medical literature, I have a PhD in biophysics, whether the treatment was making sense or not through the medical literature, and I didn't have a clue. I had to go through websites that explain things. The primary literature is too difficult even for people with a PhD, right? So the notion that open publications really make a difference to the wider public, it's highly questionable. While it's a public good having publications in open access, really, does it really make such a difference? That's one. Another issue where there is a challenge is the cost of making public data openly accessible. Having data accessible is easy, but if you don't curate it with sophisticated metadata, it's hardly going to be useful for anybody. Now, making data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable with metadata is expensive. And many places of the world cannot afford it. It's even more expensive if you have to think in making this data according to thinking of responsibility of ethics. And then there is the many fields in research in which the data might be shared informally across practitioners, but it's very unclear if it makes sense to put the data in, in ways that people from other fields will pick it up. And the data that we have is that there is very low percentage of reuse from data citation index. So that's another issue in which there can be criticism. Now, the issues about open access publications through gold open access is creating barriers for people in the global south, and I think even for southern and eastern Europe. So we see that countries, as somebody located in a Dutch university, when I am the corresponding author, my paper will be automatically published by Elsevier and indexed in Scopus. That's not the case in many places in Southern Europe in Eastern Europe, not to say in Latin America or South Asia and so on. And also in terms of open data, as we were saying, this is expensive. Should labs in Kenya put their data accessible, spending resources, scarce resources in making the data available to people in the north? I don't know, maybe it's a good idea for some specific fields, but it might be questioned. Finally, so where I think open science might have had a good impact is in terms of giving momentum for the reform on research assessment, because the European Commission has been concerned about rolling out open science, open access particularly, and they have found that that research assessment was a barrier, and that without a reform on research assessment that valued a wider portfolio of activities carried out by researchers, it was very difficult for open science practices to be uptaken by researchers. And I think there is now a serious effort called the COARA, the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. Already more than 500 organizations in Europe have signed up for it. AMVUR is one of the signatories. So this might have implications. So here I see the push for open science leading towards an opening. So, and it was in the next one, yes, yes. So, given the unbalanced priority given to the outputs rather than the processes in policy, and also given that the focus on outputs in terms of open access publications and open data is not leading to outcomes, or it's leading to outcomes which are of questionable benefit, I propose, and actually it follows from the initial debate, to which extent open access should be balanced with open science in terms of the processes that lead to meaningful knowledge exchanges and dialogues. And here I believe that the UNESCO recommendation is interested in flagging values in which these processes are meaningful. And let me finish with just an anecdote. Since we're in the Museo Galileo, I like very much Bertolt Brecht, and in particular Galileo Galilei's life of Bertolt Brecht, who ends up, I don't know whether it's true, with Galileo giving the Discorsia Demonstratione Mathematica to a disciple that goes to Protestant Europe. And look, it happens that not only he goes north, but this was published in Leiden, my university, which happens to be very traditional, academic-centered. Although we have a good science, citizen science effort, it's very one of those uplift universities, and it was published by Elsevier. So what at the time was an opening, because Elsevier had the headquarters right next to where the University of Leiden, founded 50 years before, when they kicked out the Spaniards. Okay, so that was a case in which science traveled north to Protestant Europe because there was a space for diversity. So what does open science mean without open societies? So we have the Chinese Open Science Network, and they can tick in terms of open publications, open data, and citizen science. Is this really open science as broadly understood? But how about Europe? What would open science mean in a Europe that is closed, that doesn't allow a space for multilingualism? And I have to say, I'm a Catalan speaker, and I'm desperate in terms of the engagement of all the scientists coming to Catalonia and not making efforts to learn our language. But of course, we are still in a privileged position compared to many places in the world. You look at in India with many languages or the indigenous language. What does it mean is open science with so many forms of knowledge that are not being considered as legitimate knowledge? And so leave it here. Sorry if I've gone a bit too long. Many narratives of science. No, next one. Many playgrounds. This notion that there is a lot of effort in the infrastructure, in the outputs. I am not convinced that enough effort is being put in the processes of exchange. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Moltes gracias, Ismail. I'm trying to do the effort in speaking of Catalan. So Ismail showed us a bit the history, more or less, how open science came to where it is today. Also showing that it's very complex area, broad area, with different, it's an umbrella term, but there are different umbrellas, there are different pillars, there are different schools, as you show, so different narratives, and then also many playgrounds, which you show them provocatively at the end. I think those provocations are also here to be discussed with the participants in the room. And also on YouTube, we have some people on YouTube participating. Feel free, if you manage to, if you have a YouTube account, to write a comment with your questions in YouTube, and we'll take them into account. Or otherwise, send an email to Museo Galileo, and we'll answer you in a later stage. So the round is open here for starting a discussion with Ismail, taking some points of provocation, which is said, follow-up questions, and so on.
My further provocation is that there's many sciences. We're talking about one science. There's many sciences, there's many communities, there's many ways to make science, and so I think that the picture is even further complicated. So would you add those factors to your overview, or?
Oh, yes, absolutely. One thing that I was very, there was always a concern for me is when I was part of the European expert group on indicators for open science, there would be, when there were discussions, there were representatives of the genomic consortia sitting in the table, but there would be nobody coming from social work faculty of universities or from geology. So fields which are actually more applied in the hierarchy of sciences that dominates science policy have a lower status. And I think that they have more difficulty in making the case of how the engagement of social workers with communities is a form of a knowledge both ways, that it's relevant for knowledge creation, of how the interactions with people working in geology across the world in the field is also, it requires different way of thinking of what open science is. But, you know, the prestigious high energy physicists and genomic organizations were on the table. So we had the problem of diversity in this sense. And it was something that I have to confess I found quite, I found a bit irritating.
I'm going to quickly open the discussion also online to Anna Faustino, which had a question from Natural History Museum of Berlin.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me well?
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk, Ismail. I was just wondering because since you're based in Leiden, I was wondering because I was reading that I read this news about the Utrecht University and that they had announced that by 2022 that they would also make sure that in their research assessment they include other indicators beyond the impact factor of publications, like as you mentioned. Also open access publications, but also participation in engagement and public engagement initiatives, and use that also as a factor or as an indicator to evaluate their career. And I was wondering if you could also share a little bit how things are going from the Netherlands perspective, because my feeling is that a lot of it is on the policy level, because I also knew about some of the initiatives that you mentioned, like DORA and so on. But I think I'm curious about how much is actually being implemented in on a practical level.
Utrecht has had a lot of initiatives in changing research assessment towards pluralism. There is a gentleman, which a few of you might know, called Frank Miedema. He was the dean of the medical school, which in the Netherlands is a separate organization sitting next to the university, and he was one of these great scientists who at the same time was worried about the impact. So already 5 years ago they started doing some changes, some reforms in research assessment. In the Netherlands, these changes in research assessment is happening at the national level. If you can check, there is a website which is called Rewards and Recognition. It's available in English, explaining the the initiatives which they are fostering in terms of changing reward towards pluralism. And this reform in the Netherlands is facilitated by the fact that the Netherlands has a very decentralized way of doing research assessment. Departments are being assessed every 6 years with a 3-year interval, with a 3-year midterm assessment by panels of 5 people. And each department and each university has the flexibility of carrying out this assessment, which does not have monetary implications, just prestige implications. So it's the institutional setting in the Netherlands facilitates moving away from the narrow focus on publications and valuing other things. I think the problem is in centralized systems, because the question is how can you do assessment of public engagement, interaction with the stakeholders from the distance.
Perfect. Thanks for then there's a question here. Maybe also introduce yourself quickly. And
Yes, Laura Ronzon, Science and Technology Museum, Milan. 2 provocations. One about the term that you use, which is intermediary organizations. So you see museums as intermediary in something in between, let's say, organizations. And at the same time, we hear from Anna Faustino, and we know it also from Italy, that the university is trying to go towards what we call here the 3rd mission. So we have this, I would say, traditional way to see museums, which I would put strongly into discussion. And on the other side, the university, which is trying to go public in some way. Museums now are discussing about research very strongly. They don't see themselves as intermediary, not only as intermediary organizations, but as places of making research. It's a different research, as you said. So we are perfectly in the new school of looking at open science as made by different actors. And practitioners are within this framework. The museum practitioners are feel themselves as near the university, but different, but not only as intermediary subjects. This is the first provocation. The second one is about science, the use of the term science has been done by my previous question, because the other point is that research is seen only as scientific research in the sciences and technologies, while we have a strong problem now about humanistic research. And so the use of the term science is always, has always this problem, I think. So I would like to know what you think about it.
Well, in the first place, I have to apologize. You're completely right. I was using sort of the innovation systems view
Of the 90s, of the public understanding of science.
Yes. So I apologize, and I fully agree with you that I was using old terminology, and it's your perspective is much more in line with this broad notion of open science. So my apologies. And regarding the term science, I don't know how to juggle with this, in the sense that, so no, in this broader notion, we value all types of knowledge should be valued, coming from practitioners, coming from traditional forms of knowledge. And by these, this is particularly important in if you think of Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and so on, indigenous knowledge. And then here I'm lost. On the one hand, we have to deal with rather old-fashioned ministries of research, that often dominated by, I used to be a physicist, right? Like people who have these, rather traditional views of what scientific knowledge is, and on the other hand, this variety of knowledge. And I don't know what.
No, what I mean is that the use of the word science instead of knowledge is very strong in the definition of open. It's
science.
Not open knowledge. It's not open culture. It's open science.
Right.
Or maybe open science versus open humanities. So what we can do with the historians, science historians, literature historians, and things like that.
It's knowledge.
Right.
It should be open knowledge.
But here I think there is also a linguistic differences. Right? So
Yes, I think that there is also a difference in practice and in methods, in activities, because I have the impression that open science is in better relation with the hard sciences, so with biology, chemistry, medicine, rather than with humanities. There is a different kind of practice, a different kind of activity. And I mean, in the humanities,
Economic
we don't
interest.
have to save the planet. We don't. We cannot stop the climate change and things like that. Also, we don't waste the forests and things like that. But there is there is no, I think, no necessity, no urgency, for example, to publish immediately the results of our research, even if I think it could be very important to do this, but historians don't see this urgency. I mean, they are First of all, because the discoveries are not so important, because the discoveries are not linked to financing, to foundings, and I mean it's a different.
But I think that there is a semantic ambiguity, because in different languages the word science might mean more or less. Like
Yeah.
wetenschap in
Is
Dutch,
knowledge.
it's knowledge. Weten, it's to
Yeah.
wait is to know. Like I think it's Wissenschaft in German, right? So the way he was using science was in this say Germanic,
Yeah.
Which encompassed everything. That's one. And the second thing is that already in the innovation systems model, when they started, so social humanities and social science and humanities were sort of worried at the instrumental view and of knowledge. But so I have a colleague in the CSIC who is actually heading the area of CSIC, the Spanish National Research Council, who's heading the social sciences and humanities section of CSIC. And she has been one of the people who have shown that social scientists and humanists do a lot of interactions with society. Historians, when they sell a book, when they make presentations of the book, when they appear on TV explaining the history of Afghanistan, they're doing a lot of open science. It's only not in the terms that some of these policy documents in
It's not
science
seen
policy.
as innovation, while it can be seen as innovation. It's cultural innovation.
So that's one. And second, from the third school, so the third model in which you see science for in transformative innovation, the contribution of social sciences and humanities in building imaginaries, making an understanding of knowledge that recognizes the contributions of India, of China. It's extraordinary in changing the way humans think for making these needed transformations, right? So I don't see an exclusion then.
Perfect. I think with this, we're going to close this part of this section. Again, thank you very much, Ismail, for your intervention discussion afterwards. You talked about the German word Wissenschaft, which I think is a good transition to our German-speaking museums, which are online in Vienna and Berlin. Katrin Frohland and Anna Faustino, who will share some of their experiences in open science in their respective museums. We're going to start with Katrin Frohland. Katrin Frohland, she is Director General and Scientific Director at the Natural History Museum in Vienna. And before, she worked more or less 20 years, you will probably explain a bit better, in museums, amongst other also, if I'm not mistaken, in Berlin, in the Natural History Museum in Berlin. And you will show us now, explain us a bit the approach Vienna is taking in open science.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very kind invitation. And I would like to ask, I don't know, Anna or you to share my presentation because thanks Anna, because the internet is so unstable. And also thanks, it was super interesting to listen to the talk before about all these ambiguities of open science. So if you go to the next slide. Next, Anna, please. Next slide. I wanted to show you that we are a more or less rather normal museum, a very imperial and beautiful one. So we have collections. So next slide, about 30 million objects from various origins, so minerals, insects, plants. And if you go to the next slide, we also are a typical museum with regard to research. So we do research on our own collections and publish. And if you go to the next slide, and we also have this public outreach. So we have this public exhibition, but we have also guided tours. We have a lot of pupils, and we sometimes have exhibitions for specific topics, like for instance, Brazil. So we are a typical museum, research, collections, public outreach. If you go to the next slide. Next slide. We discussed internally who we would like to be. And when I started 2 years ago, or no, nearly 3 years ago, we came together to think about what type of impact we would like to have also on society. And if you go to the next slide, one of these things is to open really our collections to a broader audience. And if you go to the next slide, we tried to write it down in some kind of strategy where we reflected why we want to be open, open science. I'm also reflecting the pillars of the EU, which have been just presented, but also looking into what we do in our own institution. And if you now go to the next slide, we did some kind of mapping. So we thought in which areas we are already active and which areas belong to our museum, what would we like to achieve. And if you look a bit more in detail, you see it's not only the collections and citizen science I refer to a bit more, but it's also areas like open access or open innovation. Open innovation, we also would like to bring our collections more into economic realms or also in educational realms. And we also have the idea what we develop to make it open source. I will now concentrate because it's only short impulse. I was asked for on 2 areas. Next slide, on tip, please. One is citizen science. If you go to the next page. So that is something, next page, which is, thanks, very typical for museums. And they already had a history in citizen science or in citizenship. Many of the big museums and also the small museums in Europe rely on the activities of a broader public. And also currently, I think it's a bit more organized in projects and a bit less in this permanent activities, which we still have in the museum. So we have a lot of projects in the different areas where we would like to include the citizens. And we also have this debates how citizens can contribute, how participatory is it, how much they are really involved in developing the scientific question. Most activities are on generating data on, for instance, biodiversity. We are linked to different networks. And if you tip further, we also will have the large EXA conference next year in Vienna. So that is one area we may explore more, and also to reflect on how much it is instrumental. With a colleague, I also analyzed the science paper from the European Commission, and we had the impression that citizen science is somehow a bit more instrumental and a bit more top-down than how we approach this more as a bottom-up process. And what is interesting, that increasingly also social sciences look into what you also described before, into the processes, how we really co-design projects, how we really co-create knowledge. So this is one example how we as a museum engage. And if you go to the next page, the area where we invested currently really most of our resources is to open the collections. And probably you are aware of the science paper, which just was released some few weeks ago, which again made the value of collections very visible, the value for health, for agriculture, for a lot of areas which we need to make the world a bit more sustainable. If you go to the next page, what we in first line or started to do is to really develop one database for our collections. You go to the next slide. It's a very intensive process because we need a lot of discussions. this we could not just buy one of the systems, for instance, Berlin was using, because the requirement had been so diverse. So we have archaeological collections, we have stones, we have plants, we have an archive. And if you go to the next slide, it is really a process that takes time. We started more or less 2 years ago to frame the project. So, and currently we are in a phase to discuss how the interface should look like. And it really costs resources. And it was also a question whether it's valuable to invest all this. But we think we are a public institution, and it should be very transparent what we have in our own collection for the public. And it also makes work a bit more easy if you are searching something. It's a good idea that you can ask, why, what do we have from Nigeria? What do we have from the Netherlands? What do we have from a specific curator? What do we have on a specific group on insects, also to ease the collection work. If you go to the next slide. Together with other institutions in Austria, there are several museums, but also universities, with the idea to open their collections and to profit from each other. We as the Natural History Museum are the biggest institution in Austria with regard to natural history collections. So we also try to support others, because for instance, we have been part of the DISCO and provide the guidelines and the discussion on standards, on workflows and tools with the others, and vice versa. It's also important to include the smaller collections and information, because they host a lot of the local biodiversity of Austria. And as you may know, there's also the initiative to have a European research infrastructure, which is called DISCO. And currently, we try to convince the Federal Research Ministry to contribute to DISCO. And if you go to the next page, there's also something called European Open Science Cloud, which is not really a cloud, but for us it was also interesting to bring the collections to the awareness of the European, finally, larger research community, because we think that the collection also have a value for other research areas. And also this vision of open link data, that the data from collections or the information which is in the specific objects can be linked with their genetic, geographical data to other data from completely different realms to have some scientific added value. Anyhow, if you go to the next slide, some thoughts for this discussion. Next, please. It is really, you really need, so we really think citizen science is necessary, and we really would like to open our collections. We would like to make our research more transparent, because I really think it helps to combat the loss of biodiversity, and also to address topics of climate change and other things. But if you go to the next, but really have to invest a lot of resources. And typically the overall budget of an institution like our museum is not growing only because we change our workflows and we do some digitalization. So that also causes discussions about priorities. So it really has to be worth it. And if you please another tick, Anna. For the next, we really also have to look into the balance of what we do physically, because you still have to care for the objects. They are eaten by beetles and others. And also with regard to the social aspects, we cannot do everything virtually. As you see now, it would be much nicer if everybody would sit in one room. And also this social component cannot be neglected, neither in the exhibitions nor in science education or in other aspects. And we also always have to think about the balance between what we have in the physical world with regard to the objects, to the humans, and what is the added value of opening everything up in the digital room. Yeah, that's SNM Pulse. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
And
Thanks a lot,
Mhm.
Katrin, Roland, for joining me from the train. Maybe as a follow-up question, you presented your open science strategy. So which stakeholders did you include in the design of the strategy? And now that it exists, what support do you get in order to implement the strategy?
Mhm. Well, the strategy was done within the museum, so there had not been external stakeholders. It was a group of persons who are interested and from different areas of the museum. So from the natural sciences, from the humanities, from science education, from those persons who do the citizen science stuff, but also persons who look a bit more into the finances. So we look where we would like to go to, and then we presented and discussed the strategy for everybody in the museum who was interested. So really made some kind of World Cafe and workshops to get the inputs and insights from everybody, from the collection managers, from the educators, and so on. And then we published this. This strategy, in fact, was very visible in Austria, and it helped us to generate some resources. For instance, is now money from the Resilience Fund, also in Austria, and the ministry used it also to digitize digital cultural heritage. And we have been asked to support this process. So with this visibility, we are able to generate some more resources for this, for finally this digitizing agenda. Just answers your question. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. We're going to take one or two questions from the room, if there are any.
Yes.
Or Anna. Yeah.
Anna,
Go on.
Hi, Katrin. I'm Sara Di Giorgio from GAR, and also
Hi.
I'm the coordinator of Skills for IOSC, but it's a common project on which we're collaborating. So my question is about the skills. Since you have said that there is the need of new skills for managing the creation of the digital collection, what are the things? How the things are changing in your museums in order to upskill the creators of your collection?
Yeah. Skills for IOSC, we are a partner, but we are not yet active. That is one of the points with regard to the resources. Now it's a third-party project. We have somebody starting now in June, but you need also the staff to care for the persons. Our idea is to go into the specifics of the collections and also to cooperate with the university. The universities increasingly start to develop courses for data stewards. And we would like to add specific modules also for other European universities with the specific standards for collections. So for instance, in the DISCO projects, the SMITS level developed, so an idea how the metadata will be structured, what fields are there in, and so on, how that looks like at different levels. Just as one example, what we would like to develop as a module for persons who are curating the collections.
Yeah, and also this is questions also for you, if you can help us, because on one hand we have a lot of scientific knowledge for the metadata, for describing the collections since we did in our knowledge process, but to be more inclusive and to start to open our mind also for the contribution from the society, for the minority people, I think that we need some specific skills to allow curators to have a real impact on the society. So I feel that there is still a gap to
If I'm not mistaken, I think it's one of the key issues which also Anna Faustino will talk about, capacity building in this area. So this would be an excellent transition if there are not any other questions, but otherwise, is there other urgent question, or otherwise we can give Anna the floor and then we address those questions to Anna Fassino and Katrin Poland. Okay, in this case,
Hi, everyone.
just introduction. Anna Fassino is public engagement, senior project manager, working at the intersection between science and society at the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin. And she worked before also in the European Commission Horizon 2020 Open Science Hub network and in the Open Science Hub Portugal. And recently she was working at Flooding Walls Engage in Berlin. So a lot of experience in public engagement and open science. Anna.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And also thank you so much for the invitation and for the talk so far. I had a question for Katrin, but I think since we have time afterwards, we can all just speak after I also give my impulse. So I will just share my screen. I hope everything works. Can you just quickly tell me if you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm here representing the Public Engagement and Impact Unit, which is also a unit from the Society and Nature Research Area of the Museum für Naturkunde Berlin. As you know, the Museum für Naturkunde Berlin is promoting open science in many ways, also from the digitization of the museum collection to also including visitors' interests and needs into the creation of the exhibition, or also incentivizing open access publications and developing practice and research on public engagement or science communication, participation or citizen science. So there are several things that we are doing, but for the scope of the presentation that I'm going to give today, or this impulse talk, I'm just going to focus on the work, on the specific work that we do on the Public Engagement and Impact Unit, which really concerns the public engagement field and really how to use engagement practices to really foster open science at the Naturkunde Museum. So then this is basically the team behind the Public Engagement and Impact Units, and I thought it would be also nice to tell you a little bit about us in terms of who is doing the work. So the team is composed by Alina Loth, Wari and Victoria Shannon, Jana Wendla, Anna Zoe Air, myself, and then Sonia Aman, Lynn Harrels, and Anna Zolotaryov. And we work on different projects under the Public Engagement and Impact Unit, and I will just speak about two of them today, which is the Berlin School and the Yeti project. And I will just tell you a little bit more about them in just a few minutes. Yeah, so before we go into what we do at the Public Engagement and Impact Unit, I just wanted to give you an overview on two important concepts that I will be using a lot, just because I think often when we are speaking with persons that come from different backgrounds and also different countries, concepts are used differently. And I thought this was also important to make clear from the beginning. So for us, public engagement, and this is a concept that we defined recently through these principles of public engagement in Germany. So public engagement for us describes a practice of exchange between researchers and the public, and stands for this attitude that both research and society benefit from mutual interaction. And impact, for its part, refers to the effects, or like all the changes that we can really generate with our public engagement initiatives on our target audiences or the stakeholders involved in our projects, or also our institutions. So basically, this impact can have an individual or a systemic scope, depending on the type of impact that we're actually looking at. So yeah, since we are already now are all on the same page regarding definitions, these are kind of the goals for the Public Engagement and Impact Unit. So foster this education and professionalization in public engagement by delivering training and hands-on learning opportunities, really potentiates public engagement institutional and culture change through rewards and recognition processes, and then also not only maximize impact-oriented research and engagement, in a way that kind of really promotes to the quality of this engagement, but also contributes to scientific knowledge production on this interface between public engagement and impact, and by making sure that we always use practices that are not only practice-oriented, but also research-oriented. So yeah, just so to have a little bit of an alignment between what we do and the open science principles, and here I'm really relying on the open science principles from UNESCO and the European Commission as reference. So these are the ones that I'm basing myself on. So really, what we do is very aligned with several open science principles, mostly the ones aligned with engagement and participation, and also co-creation and collaboration. So for once, we of course are doing a lot of investment in training and education and capacity building. As I mentioned before, we are fostering this institutional culture that rewards and recognizes open science. We are really putting a lot of effort into opening the research process to multi-stakeholder cooperation and co-design and co-creation. And we are also, of course, as I said also before, potentiating the quality of public engagement through having a more impact-oriented approach towards public engagement. And we, of course, think that not only on the research and public engagement level, we hope that all of these efforts contribute to helping to solve several complex social challenges and environmental challenges that we have nowadays that are also aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So yeah, one of the projects that I'm going to speak to you about, for the sake of time, I just chose the two ones that I think are more representative of the open science practices that we try to implement. So one of them is the Berlin School of Public Engagement and Open Science. This is a project that really aims to build capacity and competence for public engagement through training and consultancy at an individual, institutional, and international level. Yeah, and this project basically started in 2020. The partners that you see here are many, but one of the main ones is the Humboldt Universität here in Berlin, which is also a very important partner in terms of really going beyond the walls of the museum. And the goals of the Berlin School are these three main ones. So on one hand, we want to build capacity and competence for public engagement in the museum, and also the Humboldt University, then really create a culture change through training and network building. And then last but not least, yeah, innovate and evidencing the efficacy of the training in public engagement. And with all of this, of course, fostering open science in what we do. This is one of the initiatives from the Berlin School. It's the Principles of Public Engagement that you see here on the side, which is a guideline that outlines the 9 principles for public engagement in Germany, and actually was co-created by several public engagement practitioners and professionals in Germany, but also internationally. And it aims to establishing and also professionalizing public engagement and really integrate it into the academic culture and practices that exist. And yeah, we are also working on a version of the principles that will also work as an institutional commitment from the museum side to not only encourage, but also incentivize open science practices inside of the museum, especially on the reward and recognition of public engagement. The other initiative that I wanted to speak to you about is also the Collaborative Futures Academy that actually started yesterday and will be taking place until the 25th of May. And we have over 80 participants from 19 countries discussing the topics of ethics and equity and engagement. And the idea is really to bring the individual values to public engagement, but also create a meaningful dialogue and collaboration between the participants and really applying a future scenario tools to shape the current engagement practices. So again, here, this is an initiative that focuses on capacity building, but also uses the international exchange and collaboration to maximize the efficiency of engagement. And then the last initiative that I wanted to speak to you about the Berlin School is the researcher training portfolio. So we have a training portfolio that comprises 9 training modules, going from introductions on how to build a public engagement project to research storytelling using diverse communication skills and tools, and then really having also 2 models on public engagement evaluation. The first phase of this project was delivered to 355 researchers in 26 sessions in 2022. And this year specifically, we are focusing on consultancy with other German and international institutions. So really working towards having a more international scope in terms of capacity building. And we are also in the future working towards having this program being an accredited program so that we can give a certification on public engagement as well. And then the other project that I'm going to speak to you about is the YETI project. So it's the project that I'm doing the project management of. YETI stands for Impact-Oriented Public Engagement. And really, this is a research project that started only in November 2022 and really aims to potentiate and enable public engagement in the museum that is oriented towards impact, not only on the level of impact assessment, but also, and most importantly, on impact planning and also co-creation and culture change towards impact. And yeah, the main mission of YETI is to maximize the quality, efficiency, and the impact of the museum's public engagement and research. The goals of the project are also here. So we want to further align the museum's public engagement and research with societal, academic, and environmental goals, impact goals. We want to enable and support the design of public engagement initiatives that are more efficient in achieving these goals. And then we also want to, again, foster as much as we can the use of creation and multi-stakeholder processes, because this is very crucial to maximize the impact of what we do, and then really embed public engagement, this public engagement culture into research institutions in general. This project has basically 3 main content work packages. Then we have other 2 that are project management and communication. But for the sake of this talk, I'm just speaking about the 2 that are, I think, more relevant for what we are discussing here today. So we have the work package 1, which is concepts and context. The second one, it's all about impact planning and assessment. And the third one about co-creation and culture change. And really going a little bit more into detail about what we mean by all of these work packages. Just to give you an overview on the work package 1, for example, we are actually doing a lot of activities, and all of this will be mostly completed by July this year. We are mapping, for example, several project relevant stakeholders in the museum and also the public engagement initiatives that exist in order to understand whom we have to work with and also support. We are also conducting interviews to define and create a model for a total of 11 concepts relevant for the museum that go from public engagement, impact, co-creation, or for example, also citizen science, which is also one of the science and society approaches that it's very strong in the museum. And we want to create a shared understanding of terminology and facilitate, in order to also facilitate collaboration in-house. Additionally, we are mapping the motivations and barriers and challenges and needs regarding public engagement. We are actually running now an institutional survey to understand how to better design project research and activities that cater to museum demands. And finally, we are working on a scientific paper on the concepts research that I just mentioned, which will be actually a comparative analysis between the museum, Germany, and the international scopes. Then on the level of what we are doing regarding impact assessment and planning, we are of course collecting, and this was also interesting to hear the work from Katrin in Vienna, because we are actually also collecting and defining several impact goals and indicators, when we are actually aiming at during the autumn this year to establish a theory of change for the museum, really focusing on the impact that we want to have with our public engagement initiatives. And we will also be assessing the impact of the museum's public engagement through many qualitative methodologies like surveys or focus groups and interviews and case studies. And the idea is to use these efforts of the work package to showcase impact, but also to help the persons in the museum to plan their research and public engagement towards impact. And then last but not the least, we will also be running a lot of research and initiatives that are focusing on really promoting co-creation and culture change. So we will be using co-creation accelerators like design thinking or citizen assemblies to really foster the impact of public engagement and research. Then we also want to have initiatives like a workshop series on impact and project sustainability, because impact actually goes a lot more beyond evaluation, and we really would like to have our participants on these workshops to go on an impact journey that goes from impact planning to maximizing the impact through knowing how to better reach target audiences, or knowing how to better engage certain stakeholders, and then really finalizing on impact assessment tools and how to design that. And then we also want to establish a public engagement prize inside of the museum that also rewards the best practices on this level, and really work on seed granting schemes that reinforce the integration of public engagement inside of research projects, because I think here this is also specifically very important to also bring more public engagement into pure research projects that also exist inside of the museum. And of course, at all of these efforts, we will be working towards publications, not only reports, but also scientific publications. And since the project runs until 2025, we will hopefully will have a lot more to share with you in the next few years. Yes, and with this, I finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Anna. A very interesting presentation. And I'm sure many here in the room and in the world are waiting for the outcomes of your project to learn from you. So we're going to open up the room again for debate, discussion, questions, and so on. And you will again get the opportunity to ask a question to Katrin Volland afterwards.
Yes, exactly. I'm waiting
So,
for the outcome.
Okay.
So did you, I mean, plan to provide learning materials in a open, I mean, in a fairness, open way, so we can reuse it and
Yes. So for example, for the research training portfolio that I mentioned, we are already doing a lot of this training online and openly internationally as well. So it's not only German, the scope is not only in Germany, but we have several collaborations international. So if you're interested, you can just send me an email and then we can speak. And yeah, that's exactly the goal, to work towards the benefits of several persons, not only here in Germany, but also outside. And also regarding everything that we'll be producing with Yeti, the same will happen. So we will be producing also a lot of methodologies and materials that can be reused. And as soon as they are produced internally by us, and of course we will share. And we will also have a project website, and very soon we will have an entire visual identity and social communications. So then everything will be accessible there, and then everyone can profit from that. Yes. But then if you like also to then keep in touch, and then we can also speak in a way that also I know which exactly the needs you have, so that we can support you the better.
These projects that we are leading, Skills for Years, we have developed also a methodology that is for Fail by Design learning material, that maybe you can also take into consideration. And now it's under co-creation. I mean, it's open the first draft for a consultation. So I will share the link of this document and also the questionnaire, so you can get inspiration, but also provide us some insights or suggestions, whatever. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Are there any other questions? Yeah, go on.
Hello, I'm Ida Morisetti from Nazionale della Scienza e Tecnologia Leonardo da Vinci in Milan. I would like to ask you, what do you consider as the most specific and valuable assets in this public engagement process as a museum, as a museum institution? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think just one thing that I would like to say from the beginning is that public engagement, we see it as a very wider term. So we see it really as an umbrella term that really encompasses all the science and society practices that exist nowadays, going from science communication to participation to also citizen science, like Katrin mentioned. And as you know, probably as you all know, maybe Katrin a lot better, the museum has a big, diverse set of public engagements. So I have traditional science communication, or like the more unidirectional science communication, with opening the museum to the public, not only through the collection and the exhibition, but also by having the night where the school is open and people can participate. And then there are a lot of citizen science initiatives in the house. And then we also have the public engagement, the efforts of the public engagement and impact unit that currently really work as a public engagement effort to really help the researchers and all the professionals in the museum and outside of the museum to really do better public engagement. In terms of like the better practices, that how to really make sure that the museum as good public engagement practices, I would say that one thing, for example, that is very important in my opinion, and I think we are in the last few years really moving towards too, is really to ensure more public engagements that is co-created with persons that go beyond researchers and also beyond the persons leading the projects. For example, I can do a citizen science project, or Katrin can do a citizen science project, or I can do a public engagement project. But I think something that is very important is that we don't do it ourselves with our own minds only, but that we actually open it to the views of the persons that we are really trying to target in terms of our target audiences and the stakeholders that we are trying to involve, either them being NGOs or schools or politicians. So really, I think something that it's becoming really crucial nowadays is really this co-creation factor and this multi-stakeholder engagement factor. So I think this is also something that it's very important, and it really is very aligned with the open science practices that should be fostered, specifically the ones from UNESCO. And this, I think, is a strong point on the recommendations from UNESCO that they are trying to address. So I would say one of these, would be one of the aspects. And I think something that I consider very, very valuable is really, and I really like the intervention from Ismael on innovation, that's on our need to look at innovation not only being actually industry directed, but also really focusing on innovation that is really focusing the challenges that we have nowadays, our planetary challenges or societal challenges, as you might want to call it. So really, this is something that is very important, because I think often it's very often the case that not always research is having into consideration the most prominent challenges that exist, and also the needs on a local level. And that's also why we have the European Commission Responsible Research and Innovation Framework that has been already providing a lot of support to make great efforts in this regard. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done here on this level to make sure that both research and public engagement are more aligned with the challenges that we have nowadays. And we see the need of this through the climate crisis, and also the recent public health crisis generated by the pandemic. So this would be my second point. And I think the last third point would be really related with something that I think it's very important maybe to discuss. And given that we are speaking about open science for museums, I think museums are by definition a structure that it's in a place, right? So it's a structure that it's a closed structure. And I think it's also interesting to speak about engagement practices that also go beyond the walls of the museums and really try to make sure that we really put effort into that. Because in the end of the day, if we are not able to reach the publics that are not coming to the museum, then we cannot really say that we are completely open. So this is I think it's also something important to take into consideration regarding engagement.
I would like to add to the point from Anna that open science is not automatically inclusive. We see it also with citizen science. There's a strong bias towards educated persons, and it's really important to go out and also to check that the imbalances do not increase with regard to citizen science and the devices which are necessary to participate.
Good point. Thanks a lot. We still have space for one or two questions, if there are any. Otherwise, I can ask one last question still. Again, how do you embed public engagement, open science culture in the mindset of in the institution? So what are how do you ensure this? Do you go proactively towards them, or do they come to you with this demand?
Should I go, Katrin?
Yeah. It was mainly for you, Anna, but of course, Katrin, feel free to.
Okay. Yeah, I can start. Yeah, so I think from what we are doing, we see this on maybe 3 levels. So one level is really the institutional commitment towards public engagement, and that's what I was speaking about. So we have this aim to really create a commitment inside of the institution, the museum, in order to really reinforce public engagement inside of the research. And basically what this translates into is really to having a document that is agreed and co-created by different persons inside of the museum, not only public engagement professionals, but also researchers, that really decide on how can they really include more public engagement into their research routines or into their research careers. And the idea of having this policy, let's say it like that, or this governance impulse, is really to make sure that That is an official document that really states that there's a certain amount of time that researchers can and should dedicate to doing public engagement, and that they are also rewarded by that in terms of their, for example, PhD assessment in the end of their PhD, or also in their tenure evaluation. So that's really really tightly together with the research assessment movements and policy that it's really happening globally, and we are trying to have something that really works on a co-creative level also for the museum. So this is one of the things that we are looking at. And then the other two things that we are looking at with the Yeti project is really reward the efforts that are happening on public engagement inside of the museum, specifically the ones that come from the research side, because there are several researchers that dedicate part of their time, most of the time is voluntarily, to public engagement, and we want to give visibility to these persons and really recognize the best practices inside of the house. And the idea would be to have a small money incentive that really incentivizes and gives visibility to these efforts, because we also think that this is a good way to also incentivize public engagement. And the last thing that I think it's also something that I'm very excited to do, hopefully we'll also do it, is to work on trying to make sure that public engagement is more integrated into the research of the museum, because as you know, in the museum here in Berlin, we have in the same space research on different levels, social sciences, but also natural sciences, and then everything related to public engagement, and we have all into the same ecosystem. And something that we would like to do with these grants is really try to make sure that the persons doing research but not doing public engagement develop their own applications to do small public engagement projects inside of their research projects. And this is an attempt to try to make sure that this culture of public engagement is embedded in a way that it's not such a big request from the persons doing that, because the idea would be, okay, if I'm already doing the research project, then I just have to think about the public engagement project together with the support of us, the team of the project. I need to think about the project together with others that will support me on that is aligned with what I'm already doing in my research activity. So yeah, these are kind of three things that we are now currently doing and thinking of.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, this alignment with current activities, and it's a cultural change. So if you look into, for instance, change management theory, it's really to enforce those persons in the institution which already make the pace and really support them. We don't have money, but to make them visible and acknowledge what they are doing. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks again to both of you to join us virtually. And I feel here next to me, Roberto Ferrari, like a cooking pot, plenty of ideas, questions, and comments. So I will give Roberto the last words, a bit the conclusion of this morning session and take-home messages for the video.
Well, thank you again to all of you for your inspiring talk. I start from what I found particularly interesting in what Ismail said, that there are controversial results of the open science approaches and techniques and metrics. I feel this is a very interesting point. We cannot assume that the more open we are, the better results we obtain. We cannot assume. It must be verified. It must be subject to test. So it implies adopting a standpoint and taking decisions on which are the prevalent expected results we aim. And this is not an easy task, because as you clarified very well, there are different logics behind an open science approach, or potentially behind an open science approach. What I was impressed by the analytical approach that Catherine showed us through their strategy. In their strategy, every aspect of the museum's life has a link, as an orientation, but as also links with the other parts. So this reminds us that we need a comprehensive approach of the open science commitment. And what was for me impressive by Anna in the Anna's talk is that public engagement requires specific attention. It doesn't come easily, and so it is something that requires attention and means and methodologies and so on. I come to the initial questions of this meeting because it is arguable that to some extent there is I would say, a question behind. At the beginning, we said, to what extent we have to be open? To what extent implies who decides, who is the person in charge of balancing between internal and the internal approach to the to knowledge communication and including what Anna said, like including visitors' interest and need into the definition of our mission, no? Because this is very difficult. Because if we, I would say, just like an extreme example, if we open to the visitors' need, maybe they will ask us to have exhibitions on dinosaurs, but we are not. This is not our mission. So there is always someone who decides what is our mission as a cultural institution. And the assumption is that we know something more than the visitors, so there is an asymmetry, and still will be an asymmetry, always will be an asymmetry, that we can try to redefine, to readdress, but there is always, I would say, a responsibility, which is the responsibility that we have in handling information, in deciding which are the priorities for the educational approach of a museum. That it means that there is someone who knows something more, someone other. We cannot apply a general collaboration approach to cultural institutions. So, for example, we could not apply a perfect open science approach to schools or university, because there is always someone who knows more than others. So there is someone who has the responsibility to filter, they have the responsibility to propose, of course, to propose a way of assembling knowledge and priorities or an order among information. There is, because we have, I would say, human rational boundaries. So there are, by definition, even if we try to cooperate as much as we can with others, no? So the point is that does open science, to some extent, hide some form of lack of trust towards scientific community? Because there is like a question behind. Maybe those who decide what kind of knowledge has to be provided to the external public, they are enough, I would say they are good enough to decide which are the info, which are the data, which are needed outside. I don't know, maybe there is a point. I trust the scholar communities. So if we talk about the history of science, I have to trust those who are scholars in the history of science in order to define a program of scientific knowledge production and communication. I need a starting point. I need a standpoint, and I feel that cannot be different from what is scientific proved. And even if we know that the scholar community is heterogeneous, there are different opinions. This is important. This is important to foster this heterogeneity among scholars. But I think that we have to underline the importance of scholars in cultural institutions to define the agenda. Otherwise, I don't know which is expected to be our role as a cultural institutions, which always have to take decision on priorities, even if we can open up the black box and involve visitors and involve public or non-public in the decisions we take. Okay, but at the end of the day, there is a responsibility in knowledge, in the data we offer, and also to some extent in the reuse of the data we offer. Because we know that if you offer data in a way, you are always addressing the potential use of those data. If you present data visualization in one way, is never neutral. You always are suggesting a specific standpoint or multiple standpoints or perspectives, but not always potential uses are on the stage. So I think this is a point, which is the level of openness, and which are the responsibility that come from this approach and from this threshold to some extent. This is something that we are always committed to. When, for example, we have to decide in what way to offer to public an ancient document like an ancient map, for example. You can offer data and nobody can understand nothing about this ancient map, or you can work for 3 or 4 years understanding how to show how rich is the content of the data. But this requires an important job. So we always have to decide. We offer raw data in order to be potentially more open, but as Ismail said, the reuse could be very low. No? Or from the other side, we work on complex products, which have a standpoint which is clear, which is the standpoint of the scholars who worked on that product. I think this is a trade-off. This is maybe at the core of the mission of cultural institutions, because we always have to decide. We always have to understand which is the sustainable effort we can afford. So I think it's very interesting to see how you are working, because for us, it's important also to understand which are the good practices in defining strategies, but also on trying to open new venues, new way of engaging public in the work of cultural institutions and museums in particular. So thank you very much. I think it's been very fruitful for everyone. But if there are any other questions, please feel free to pose.
Probably we also have all the afternoon for this, and we still spend the entire day together. Absolutely, the discussion was fruitful, and talking about fruits, it's time about for lunch, and maybe it's so. Thanks everybody for having participated in this session. Also everybody on YouTube having listened. Thanks to Anna and Katrin who left already, and discussion will go on. Of course, as you see, there are still many open points in discuss. Thanks a lot for participating in this part of the conference and workshop.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay. Bene.
Great. So let's introduce